Well, for reaction to the new regulations as announced by the Transport Minister this afternoon, we're joined now by transport economist Ofentse Mokoena. Ofentse, thank you very much for joining us from Mahikeng. What's your response to the raft of transport measures announced for Level 4 this afternoon?
Well, my initial response is that these are valuable decisions that will, of course, go through important iterations for the short term. But then we're still confronted with some longer-term issues that also require as much attention, because we have to emerge out of this pandemic and still face the market conditions that we had in the first place.
So, yes, absolutely. While we're doing everything we can to safely restart parts of our economy, the bigger issue is how much of the transport industry has been crippled. And we think, of course, of aviation. And we are actually awaiting developments just this evening around retrenchment plans or not for SAA, possibly also SA Express. Do you think that those two airlines will ever recover?
Well, this is a big case, and it has a lot to do with public sector's decision whether they're going to move towards a more regulatory scheme, so where they're going to create incentives or they're going to propose conditions for the continuation of their services, or they're going to go into restructuring, complete restructuring, which might mean we'll see different types of airlines emerging from this, very lean, very quick, or they're going to close the narrative down. And that is the least likely, but it is possible under the circumstances.
We also know that the taxi industry has taken a lot of strain during this lockdown, and once again the issue of regulation, I think more support for the taxi industry is being discussed, is out there once more. Is it going to stay all talk? Do you think we might see some real changes, not only to our national carrier, but also perhaps in the taxi industry as we go through and hopefully emerge on the other side of this lockdown okay?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because in many ways for the public transport user, the taxi industry is really a national carrier in this regard. But I will say that the discussions that the minister has highlighted are quite crucial, because they lean on the forthcoming public transport subsidy. And one of the arguments is that although the industry was not part of the initial subsidy structures that existed for the 2007 and beyond mission to integrate public transport, now they will be part of something more substantial. And the debate will continue around whether they are going to choose to take an operator or a user-based subsidy. But I think in this case, we should expect an operator-based support. And also the nature of the industry through Santaco is quite interesting, largely because of their stake in the financing entities and also their own financial systems that they've started to build. So they are opening up in a very interesting way.
Let's look at Level 4 in a little more detail in terms of transport. We know that as soon as the wheels of transport start moving, quite literally, so does the economy. So it's so intricately tied together. However, we're still on a fairly tight leash when it comes to Level 4. How much do you think this release in the transport industry and generally across the economy is actually going to do for us? Or are we still in a very difficult situation economically?
Well, I think for the freight industry, particularly the rail freight and the operations of the ports, yes, I think things are going to be much better. And then also the opening up of factories. Some of the industries are operating at about 50% from now on, 50% output capacity. So things may look a little bit better. However, there are some challenges, because if we had the right systems in place beforehand, then we would actually reap the rewards of this type of scenario. But at the moment, it's a double whammy, because we've got a structural limit, and then in addition to that, we've got a systematic limit, which is just to contain and manage this particular pandemic. So it can go both ways, but it does look positive.
If you look at PRASA, the Passenger Rail Agency, and the Transport Minister is just saying they're not going to run, and not until they're absolutely satisfied, is my understanding, that they can control the overcrowding. Now, PRASA is already absolutely on its knees. How do you think it could emerge from this?
Well, that's a good question. I think, if you look at how PRASA's decline has been, it has been really difficult for the entity, especially after entering the administration state. But looking forward, the conversation might be towards, again, opening up the market. Treasury issued an interesting statement where they emphasized that, it is time for infrastructure to be separated from operations. And that is a medium to long-term initiative, but it is going to be crucial. In addition to that, if they're coming back online, what the minister said was exciting, because he argued that they will enter a stage where they'll start looking at what needs to be maintained, what needs to be checked. But at the same time, there are some real limitations that they might pick up, because during this lockdown period, there might have been some damages to infrastructure, and those are some important risks in the short term.
Realistically, how much do you think is going to change? If you look at PRASA, it can't even keep people safe, it can't prevent overcrowding, it can't prevent trains being burnt out and cables being stolen. And despite the best efforts and people constantly saying the right things, nothing seems to really get fixed.
Yes, to fix, for example, a railway company that is at that, of that size, so complex. It's got land use, it's got long distance buses, it also has a rail service. It's a difficult task. However, the only way to intervene is to not just do it administratively. There need to be significant and important regulations that focus on the economic performance of the entity, of the board, of the executive teams. And it might require some unbundling to enhance the efficiencies. We saw this happen with Transnet in 2004 when it actually let go of South African Airways. There's a likelihood that you'll see PRASA starting to let go of some of its divisions that seem to be pulling it down. And that might be an interesting and quite valuable development.
Well, transport certainly in focus, not only during the lockdown, but as we go forward. Thank you very much for your views coming to us from Mahikeng, that is independent transport economist Ofense Mokoena.